Now, Mark, please settle this for me. Is it in the Constitution that they can reappropriate money at their own discretion?
Why don't you have a satellite view of my house with the address on the door, for God's sake? Look, they can pass a law that appropriates funds for, say, unemployment. They can call it whatever they want. Where she's wrong is she claims the Commerce Clause is the Commerce Clause has nothing to do with this. They have legislative authority. So it's not clear what they're doing. Whether they're taking TARP funds and reappropriating that, in which they have to go through the statutory and appropriations process, and the Senate has to agree, or if they're just doing this by attaching it to some legislation, which I would question. So I don't know exactly what they're doing. The Commerce Clause has nothing to do with it. And, of course, the president has absolutely no power to take money that is specifically designated as a statutory matter to one program and give it to another. And as I recall, they tried to impeach Richard Nixon, who didn't want to spend some of the money Congress gave him, even though as the head of the executive, theoretically, he wouldn't have to.
But, of course, Mark, all of this was before we had a Federal Reserve, when the constitutional framers were framing, right? Now we have a Federal Reserve. It's had trillions of dollars in rescue. It's really unaccountable to the American people. We don't know where that money either came from or how and when and where it's being spent today. And then that guy, the head of that organization, has become Times Person of the Year. Leaving that aside, does Congress then get to redictate funds that might have been earmarked for things they should never have been earmarked for in the first place? Can they, in other words, reappropriate something that has already been appropriated for a given cause? Let's say TARP money that went to banks that is now being rechanneled to a variety of other pet causes.
Well, theoretically they can, because here's the problem, Neil. All this money now is like one massive slush fund. And the problem is whether Congress had, your point, the constitutional authority to use these TARP funds, which were originally passed for subprime so-called toxic mortgages, and then were then used to purchase equity positions in banks to create liquidity, and is now being used theoretically in these phony jobs bills. And so I would look at the original statute and I would say there's no authority, number one, to have used them for the banks, let alone for unemployment compensation. But I think the bigger issue here is that this Congress is so out of control that it's just playing a shell game. Whether it's TARP funds or toxic funds, it doesn't really matter. What they're doing is spending money they don't have and running the printing presses and borrowing money. And whether it's called a jobs bill or a stimulus bill or cap and trade or a health bill, they are going nuts, and they're not about to let the Constitution get in the way, period.
You're right about that. And by the way, for those who know, we have Mark Levin with us right now, the best-selling author, the radio host. You were at a rally. Was this a Tea Party rally some time ago? And
yes, it was a great rally, and I look pretty good there now that I'm looking at myself.
You're a very handsome man.
Yes, thank you.
So, Mark, I got to ask you this. I mean, let's say they are acting illegally, or some people say they potentially could be acting illegally. Can that be challenged in the courts, or do you just, you let it go? I mean, another Congress would deal with this or try to reverse this. What?
This is the weakness in our system. The courts are reluctant. They do it from time to time to get involved in what they call political disputes. If there is a constitutional violation by Congress, sure, we could take it to the courts, and whether they accept it and they find standing, and you get into court and you argue on the substance, the problem is the courts are as bad as Congress. Congress wouldn't be doing half of what it's doing if the FDR court hadn't given its rubber stamp to all these government-run centralized federal programs, which are unconstitutional on their face. So, if we're going to run to liberal judicial activists to try and stop liberal activist members of Congress, it's just a tough road. No, what we need to do is throw these bums out and replace them with serious people who believe in the Constitution.
In the meantime, Mark, before I let you go, the bigger thrill for you doing your widely listened to radio show tonight or appearing, albeit remotely via audio, on my show now?
Always being with you. There is nothing like being with you. I want the whole world to know that it is always the highlight of my career.
All right. You're a good man, and I can't believe this book, phenomenal.
Thanks, bro.
Very good having you on, Mark.